Greetings everyone, my name is Zetterville, and welcome back to my Let's Play of Mega Man Dr. Wily's Final Attack. During the last part, I defeated the last 3 Roadmasters, so in this part, I'll be going through Wily Stages 1 through 3. Now, the way this game presents the Wily Stages is unique, because you can actually replay any Wily Stages at any order as long as you have unlocked it. Unlike other Mega Man fan games and games where once you complete a Wily stage, you can't replay it unless you start all the way back from the beginning, or you have a save game right at that point, either one. But this game, even if you saved at a later Wily stage, you can replay the older ones. So it makes it a lot easy to replay stages, and a lot better for example, perfect runners, so I do appreciate it. Here's the Wily Fortress intro. Unfortunately, this Wily's Fortress is missing an important feature, the pipe on the right side. Well, not really important, but you know, almost all the Wily Fortresses in the main Mega Man games have that pipe. Anyways, here's Wily Stage 1. It takes place in the sunset, and we have all those flies, the sort of fan fiends, as well as the stompers. And the musical track of the stage is an NES remix of Dark Castle from Kirby's Dream Land 2, aka that was the final world stage team. Now, the original stage team for this stage came from Mega Man Battle Network, which was actually a MIDI remix of the battle team from Mega Man Battle Network 1. Personally, I prefer this team more so because it's more fitting, and that one was a little bit too... I don't know, it didn't fit this stage. I can't really put it into words, but that original stage team didn't really fit with this stage. But this one fits a lot better. Anyways, we already saw that we had to climb that vine, and we had to avoid falling to the spikes by floating on those fans at the correct time. And as expected through Wily stages, all of the gimmicks and enemies in the previous 8 Roadmaster stages will return. In fact, we'll also see the force beams return from Brian Man's stage, although I don't want to say return because that was an optional stage. We don't get the mirror segment from Brian Man's stage, so that's the unique part. And yeah, I still don't remember where these platforms are from. I'll put that in the description. Remember what I was saying earlier about reflecting projectiles? This is where it becomes important. You cannot hit this giant bee unless you use the Hawk Seeker, or use something like the Frost Arrow, or probably position the Spear Shot at the correct point. Instead, you need to reflect all of your shots off of these, whatever these metal bars are, or nails. Thankfully, all weapons can be reflected just like that, and they can hurt enemies, not just the Mega Buster. Now, this is one of those places where it's important to note that spikes aren't solid in this game. So if you do decide to damage boost over some of these segments, be really careful, because if you have invulnerability frames open, but you go over the spikes, you'll fall right through them. I actually died once over here in this segment because I got hurt by that Pandita, and I got shunted back on the spikes with my invulnerability frames, but I fell right through it. In most other Mega Man fan games, most other Mega Man games, spikes are solid, so even if you have invulnerability frames, you'll be able to walk on them. As long as it follows Mega Man 2 spike physics, that is. So, when I found out here that they aren't solid, it was kind of a nasty surprise. And yeah, these enemies are still annoying to hit even with the Spear Shot. I keep mixing up the Speed Drill and Speed Arrow, my apologies. Speed Drill and Spear Shot, my apologies. I keep thinking the Spear Shot is more like an arrow from its graphics, but it's really a spear. After all, Spearman's spears, they look a lot more like spears, but these, they don't the Spear Shot doesn't really look like a spear to me, it looks more like a arrow. Also, make sure to hold right when going down these, don't hold left, otherwise you'll die. And that was the reintroduction of those force beams. But thankfully, just like as I mentioned in the previous part in Brian Man's stage, they'll only deal 7 points of damage, they're not instant death. Unfortunately, it doesn't really apply to spikes. I wish it also applied there. And I'm going to be using the Seasonal Berry here because of the sudden appearance of all these Rocket Cone enemies. And we have the totem enemies, and we're at the end of the stage. When I compare it to the other Wily Fortress stages in this game, I would say this is one of the toughest, tied with Wily Fortress 3. I actually died 7 times throughout the recording, or when I was recording. And thankfully, the designer was very generous while going through this segment, throughout this stage, because he placed 8 life ups or weapon pickups here, which I do appreciate. It's kind of overkill considering that most other games and fan games don't do that. Anyway, here's the boss of Wily Fortress 1. This, whatever this box is, it's harder than its original version in version 1. So first it'll open both of its eyes, which are its weak point, and it'll fire 3 series of spread shots, which will be fired slightly towards wherever you're standing. Then after that, after it closes its eyes again, it'll charge up and fire a beam which will take up the entirety of that platform or this boss. Now it's harder compared to the original one because in the original game, that beam only took up the part of the platform which was glowing, instead of the entire platform like it is now. And that was my mistake. Thankfully there's in the bottomless pit over there. And then after that, the eyes will open up and start bouncing around the room repeatedly. And then rinse and repeat and you can defeat the boss. Thankfully it's weak against the Hawk Seeker, so it makes it a lot easier to deal with, especially because of how often it can bounce around the room. But that's Wily Fortress 1. From here on out, the bosses are about the same difficulty as they were before, or slightly easier. And here's Wily Fortress 2, and we have Mega Man 5's Wily Castles team for the musical track for this stage. Really, in comparison in terms of difficulty, I would say it's a step down compared to Wily Fortress 1, because there are less dangerous bottomless pits. Now, there are some segments where you have to go over bottomless pits while walking or running through these circular platforms, but they aren't as difficult as compared to, let's say, Mega Man 2.5D. The main reason for that is because the wheels push you slower compared to that game. Whereas in that game it would rapidly push you, here it's a lot slower, so you can keep your bearings more easily. And you can keep your positioning on the platform a lot more easily. And sorry for that annoying sound effect if you run your seasonal barrier over guarded enemies, like for example this Spine or Gabiole, or one of those Metools or Metars, it's going to repeatedly make that sound. Because it doesn't pierce, of course. It can get quite annoying with certain other enemies, but thankfully it doesn't happen too much in this game. To be quite honest, there aren't that many guarded enemies in this game, outside of maybe the Metools, Metars, shield attackers, and the Gabioles. There aren't many that guarded enemies. Maybe only 4 or 5 types, if I think I'm forgetting one. So I do appreciate that this game focuses more on enemies who fire back at you, who are tough ones, or are kind of hard to hit because of their movement patterns. And we have another spike drop segment. It isn't that bad, thankfully. I only died once at this, but that was in one of my test runs. If you want to get the E-Tank, you have to go to the left, of course, but I already have 9 E-Tanks to spare, so it's not much of a problem. And because I have 9 extra lives, any extra life I get, or an E-Tank, I'll get fully restored to max health. Here's a little bit of precise platforming. You need to let go of the jump button when you're just high enough so you don't hit yourself on the spikes. And here's the rematch against this sword boss. It's a little bit more difficult because of those rolling cogs on the left and right, but it isn't too bad. As usual, I suggest you stand in the middle and then try attacking it and try jumping to the opposite side, or the part of the room that's farthest from the sword. I suggest you use either the spear shot or the speed drill in order to destroy it. Using the double shock is a much more risky maneuver and you're more likely to get hurt by it, but it is faster. Alternatively, you could use a carefully positioned frost arrow, but it's kind of hard to do. Also, here's one of the only really useful parts where the remote mine is very useful in comparison to most other weapons. Because of how it drops, you can basically drop it just above an enemy which you can't easily hit, and you can just one-shot it because it's an explosive-based weapon. Now, you could use something like the Spear Shot or Hawk Seeker in order to destroy it, but if you use the Remote Mine, oh, it's a lot easier. Speed Mine, sorry. Control Mine. I keep mixing up my Mega Man weapons, my apologies. To me, it's kind of like it looks kind of like the Remote Mine from Mega Man Base, even though it doesn't act that way. And I think it should be called Speed Mine because the Broadmaster's name was Speed Woman. But it's Control Mine. Even though you don't really have much control of remotely detonating it, it's more like you can just control where it's going to be dropped and then it'll explode. So really, to me, it should be called the Speed Mine or something. And that crusher segment wasn't that bad either. It seems that the spikes in those crushers are also not solid either. And here's the obligatory Wily Fortress 2 water segment, or at least every Wily Fortress seems to have a water segment of some sort. Here's the part I was talking about, which is a little bit challenging. We have the giant piranha or teat fish from Glacier Man stage, and we also have all these rolling cogs from Mega Man 5. It's kind of like it's kind of like a similar segment in Mega Man 5 Wily Fortress Stage 2 or 3, where you have to jump from these cogs underwater at the spike ceiling. But unlike its rendition, for example, Mega Man 2.5D, it's a lot easier because the rolling cogs are a lot slower, so they don't push you as far. So it's not as much of a challenge to stay on these cogs. Plus, there are not as many enemies who can just shunt you off the pit, aka so many Metools or Dive Metools who can snipe you with their projectiles. So Rush Jet or Rush Coil isn't as necessary. Now we just need to take care of this final shield attacker and we're moving on to the boss. Now, out of the two other boss fights, or well, out of the 3 boss fights we'll see in this part, I would say this is the second most RNG heavy. Or maybe the most RNG heavy, but it's not saying much. Once again, a lot of weapon energy refills. Thank you, developer. And here's the boss of this stage, the Wily Slot Machine. This is one of the more unique bosses I've seen in a Mega Man fan game, to be fair. This boss has a series of 3 attacks. When I said it's RNG in the sense that it's a slot machine, but you can control what attacks it'll do. Now, the weak point of this Wily machine is its belly button, or whatever this is at the bottom. But in order to shoot it, you need to activate all 3 slots. Now, each slot is connected to that image at the top. So depending on when you shoot the handle down, it'll determine what attack this Wily Slot Machine will do. It'll do it in order from left to right. The attack that he really wanted to do is the one where it fires all those big orbs in a showering pattern, because that's rather easy to dodge. The second one is when he fires all those energy orbs from its mouth, and in a pattern where it gets closer and closer to the middle. That's the second most difficult to dodge. The most difficult one is when he fires a series of projectiles coming from the left and right sides of the screen. That can be really difficult to dodge, and I've never been able to do that, unfortunately. Mainly due to the last 2 or 3 that I need to jump over in a precise fashion. But otherwise, I say it's RNG, but it's as RNG with a slot machine, and you can control what attacks it does if you get more skilled enough. And here's Wily Stage 3, which uses the Mega Man 3 Wily Stage theme from the Game Boy games. And honestly, I prefer this version, well, in comparison to the MIDI version of this song, I say I rate them about equally, because this was taken directly from the Game Boy games, and this was not remixed to an NES style, or done something like in the Rush Jet 1 style. So I'm kind of equally biased towards either this or the original MIDI remix. I do appreciate the versions of the songs of the previous 2 stages more than their MIDI remixes though. Now, this stage originally was a lot more challenging for a certain segment that we'll see in the later half of this stage. And for the boss, of course. And the boss too, that is. But otherwise, it's still a relatively challenging stage, mainly due to all of the instant death hazards, these heavily damaging projectiles, and the quite dangerous positioning of these enemies. here's the one I was alluding to earlier, of the much more difficult encounter against this octopus or squid. You need to quickly take care of his tentacles because you're on non-solid platforms. This is a lot harder than the original version of this game, because in the original version, in this boss fight or mini-boss rematch, you actually had solid ground, but now you have temporary solid ground. But that's the only change in this version that made the stage more difficult. As usual, I would say that this stage promotes more careful movement compared to the previous two stages. The first one, well, it kind of preferred more like precise movements at the correct, or quicker movements where you have to jump from vine to vine and avoid certain enemy projectiles. The third stage focuses more on slower, precise movement and being careful where you go. Sure, there are some segments where you have to go faster, like these firewall descending moments, but for the most part you have to be a lot more precise. The second stage especially was focused even more on precision, to be quite honest, because how you have to avoid skewering yourself on the spikes. Stage 3 is kind of like the balance between Stage 1's speed and Stage 2's precision. And to be fair, Wily Stage 3 is the second to last regular Wily Fortress stage, which actually has a level before the boss fight. Wily Fortress 4 and 5, you'll see in the next part, they only contain boss fights, really. But something I haven't really commented on throughout this LP enough is how good the level design is. Oh sure, now that I think about it, I was too harsh in my earlier assessment or initial assessment of the original version of this game. Originally I rated it a 5 in terms of fun factor or average, but now that I think about it, this should be more like above average, and with all the changes I would rate this from above average to actually a good Mega Man game. Or pretty decent. Like somewhere between 6 or 7 in terms of scores. I'm originally rated it quite harshly, mainly because of other things in life being so busy, and the fact that I didn't play as many Mega Man fan games, so I didn't have a good perspective. But now, after playing so many Mega Man fan games, I have a better perspective of what I like and what I don't like in Mega Man games, and what I would like fan games to more explore. Here's the segment I was talking about that was a lot more difficult in the original game. Here you kind of need to memorize which part of the stage or which areas you need to fall under so you don't skewer yourself or fall on the spikes. In the original version of this game you have to memorize it a lot more, but here there's a lot more levity involved and so you need to memorize less. Which I do appreciate because I died 3 times when I forgot to memorize. Plus here, even when you're falling, you actually have a little bit of you have more time to react to falling into the spikes. There's only one segment where if you take the wrong route, like on this screen, if you take the left route, you'll fall on the spikes. But if you go on the top and you go take the left one, you'll be fine. And sure, if you fall on the right, you'll die too, but you only need to memorize about 2 parts. Whereas in the original game, you have to memorize, I think, 3 or 4 of those falling parts. Oh sure, you do need to memorize what's on the right as well, but at least you can always hug the left of the wall, and you'll damage tank quite a bit of damage, but you don't have a chance of instantly dying. Even if you hug the right side of the stage, you still have just enough time to react to the spikes and hold left. Once again, we have a lot of weapon refills. Kind of overkill compared to all of the other Mega Man fan games. And here's the boss of this stage, the Kracko Devil. It first starts out by firing those Wily Orbs, or shockwaves, kind of the same ones from the mini Kracko clouds. Those will fire once, just like Wily Orbs, and then it'll lock onto your position before traveling off screen. Then its eye will hit the bottom of this platform, and then you can shoot at it a few times, and then it'll start dividing into smaller chunks. And it'll go to the opposite side of the screen, fire the shock orbs, and move aside back to the middle of the platform. Rinse and repeat. This boss fight is a lot easier compared to the original version of this boss fight, for 3 reasons. The first reason is that it will show you what cloud will go next before it starts moving. In the original version, the cloud would immediately start moving up or down, so you'd have a lot less time to react to it. Here, just before one of the cloud chunks starts moving down or up, it turns white. In the original version, that didn't happen. The second thing that made this boss fight a lot easier is that the eye, once it gets exposed, it'll always sit down at the middle of the platform on the ground level instead of going at a random elevation, because in the original game it wasn't set where it would always be at the middle of the platform. It would either be at the middle, the ground level, it maybe it just elevated and you may need to jump shoot, you may need to do it in the apex of your jump, or even the middle. It was random in that regard. And the third reason is that the eye will never shoot a projectile at you. In the original fight, once the eye was exposed for a short period of time, it would fire a small projectile at your last position, so you could get hurt by that. But now in this boss fight it's a lot more predictable, and there are less projectiles being shot at you. So it's a lot less hectic and a lot easier. It's certainly more predictable, yes, and less RNG heavy, but it's a lot easier. Though I would have liked it if the original version of this boss fight was saved for a potential hard mode for this game, because having the eye shoot at you does add a little bit of challenge so you can dodge. And maybe have the vary the eye elevation, but that should be saved for hard mode and not normal mode, because otherwise that boss fight was tough enough anyway. Well then, in this part I completed Wily Stages 1 through 3. In the next part, I'll be completing Wily Stages 4 through 6 and finishing the game. Thanks for watching and have a nice day. Toodles!